Chapter 6. Eritha navigated her segmented body through the kitchen's drainage hole, thankful that it was currently free of any effluents. Once inside, she saw the staff busy with readying the food for that night. They didn't notice her as she moved along the wall's edge. She left the room and glided down to the door to the outside, where a guard sat sleeping on a stool. Eritha rose up to study him for a moment. So far, she had only had to propel herself forward. This next move was more complex. She quieted her mind and allowed the squeezer's muscle memory to guide her. Her long shape stretched and wound itself upwards, wrapping around the sleeping elf as it went. When he awoke and tried to cry out, it was too late. Her fur-covered form muffled his mouth as she tightened her coils. He passed out, and Eritha removed herself from the elf, who fell to the floor in a heap. She then pushed the crossbar of the door up with her head and was able to force it open. Calarian entered, stepped over the guard, and then elf and animal made their way to the stairs of the tower. At the bottom step, it was evident that it would be faster for Calarian to carry Eritha, so they picked her up, wrapped her around their neck, and proceeded up the stairs. About halfway to the top story was heard the footsteps of someone descending. Calarian readied themselves for a fight. When the guard turned the corner and beheld the sight of a large elf wearing a live squeezer as a scarf, he turned right around and ran back up, exiting on the next story. "Now what gave him such a fright?" Calarian laughed, as they raced up the remaining stairs to the very top of the keep. Reaching the floor that Bellerania cited as the location of Eltheria's room, Calarian peered from behind the wall. There, midway down the long torch-lit hallway, stood a guard. It was evident that he knew the fortress was under attack. His sword was drawn, and he looked warily up and down the corridor. Calarian set Eritha down and conjured their mirror image, placing it at the opposite end of the hall. When the guard looked in that direction, Calarian stepped out, as did their duplicate. Surprised at first, then emboldened at seeing that the intruder was unarmed, the guard approached them. Calarian started walking towards the deceived elf, then began to run. Their reflection did the same. When the guard brought his sword down through the illusion, Calarian was at his back. They put the crook of one arm under his throat and the other behind his neck, squeezing until the guard was unconscious. Immediately following this, two sounds were heard. One was over quickly and sounded like tumbling stones. The other was prolonged and echoed down the hallway. Calarian looked to the source and was horrified to see a guard standing above the squeezer. His sword stuck into her as she writhed and hissed, a raspy, tortured wail. "No!" Calarian shouted, running towards them as the elf raised his sword to strike again. Before he could bring it down, though, he cried out and dropped his weapon, which clattered to the stone floor. When the guard turned around, Calarian saw the reason. Paul stood there, a bloody knife in his hand. Fear was on his face, but he stood his ground until the guard swatted him like he would a fly, knocking him against the wall. Paul fell limply to the floor. The effect of the injury on the guard was short-lived. He picked up his sword to finish Paul, but before he could, Calarian was there, with the sword they had taken from the other guard. They brought it down, but it was blocked as the guard swung around, and soon Calarian was on the defensive. Unlike Calarian, this elf had practice with a weapon. Their strength was no match for his speed and skill, but when things seemed dire, the guard again howled in pain. From his place on the floor, and while still on his belly, Paul had managed to drive his blade into the elf's calf. Calarian took this opportunity, bringing the hilt of their sword down hard upon the elf's head and rendering him senseless. Calarian helped Paul to his feet, and the two caught their breath before Calarian said, "Eritha!" and rushed over to the squeezer, who was lying motionless on the floor, blood matting its fur around the stab wound. They knelt down and checked its breathing. "Still alive, but she must return to her body soon." "You must take her then," Paul said. "But Eltherea is behind that door. We came for her." "I am not strong enough to carry the squeezer. It must be you. There is no time. Go, I will get Eltherea." Calarian did not argue further. Lifting up the animal, they wrapped it around them as before and ran off to descend the tower stairs. Paul went to the door next to where the first guard lay. It was locked, so he searched the body of the elf and found a single key on a ring. He put it in the keyhole, turned it, and opened the door. Little could be seen in the room except the light coming from a hole on the opposite wall. The hole was jagged and looked to have been knocked out from the inside. "Ellie? Eltherea?" Paul shouted into the room. "It appears that she has left us both," said a voice from behind him. Paul turned around to find an elf looking at him with piercing blue eyes. His features were sharp, his blond hair long and straight, parted in the middle and tucked behind his ears and spilling down to his chest. He was just as Paul remembered from the storyteller's flames. "Raneth?" The elf smiled at Paul, then struck him in the face. Something was happening. Eltherea heard shouts in the distance. It sounded to be coming from the front of the fortress. Through the slim gap between the bottom of the door and the floor, she could see that her guard was visited by another. Those feet soon left, but still her jailers remained. She didn't want to risk her escape while he stood there. If he heard, he would alert archers, but she couldn't wait much longer. Finally, a stroke of luck, his feet moved away. Eltherea quickly summoned the vines, and they crept in through the narrow window, then radiated outward, fastening themselves to the inner wall. The vines pulled, and the surrounding stones were brought down, falling to the floor and the ground below. Without hesitation, she stepped through the resulting hole and was carried to safety by a multitude of leafy fingers. After reaching the ground, she walked the narrow ledge between keep and cliff until she was on the courtyard grounds. She knew her best course would be to run into the woods, but her curiosity over the commotion heard earlier wouldn't allow it, so she went along the outer wall towards the front gate. From a gap where crumbled stone had yet to be rebuilt, she could see the main entrance. All seemed quiet until she saw an elf on the tower poke his head out from behind a battlement. The second he did, an arrow flew by his head, and he quickly ducked back behind the safety of the wall. Eltherea leapt over the stones and ran towards the arrow's source, her progress obscured from view by the huts on the enclosed grounds. There behind one of them was Primrose, grazing on grass, unbothered by the battle taking place mere feet away. She rushed in to find her mother and father, bows at the ready, peering through the gaps in the wooden wall. They turned, ready to fire at the intruder. "Eltherea!" her mother gasped, lowering her bow. "You escaped!" She hugged her, followed by her father. "Where are Clarion and Eritha? Are they not with you?" "No. What do you mean? I made my own way out. Did they enter the keep to free me? I did not see them. Is that why you are here, shooting at the keep? To call away the guards so that they may move more freely?" "Just so," her father answered. "But now that you are safe, we should go to our camp. It's just beyond the tree line. If Clarion and Eritha find you have gone, they will get Paul and return there as well." "What? Paul is here? He did not return to other place?" "He did, but he came back, and with a friend no less. But we have no time to discuss this. We are nearly out of arrows, which they must surely know. Soon they will come with swords, and your freedom will be short-lived. We must find a way to alert Bellerania and leave here unnoticed." Eltherea learned then that her sister was in the hut across the road, and they began to debate how to send a message to her that wouldn't be perceived by the guards when the creaking of heavy hinges was heard. They watched as the large doors were pushed open by 2 guards, who then stood waiting, the ones who were posted outside earlier having run off at the start of the siege. From the shadows emerged what looked to be one figure. Then Eltherea could see someone else behind the first, pushing him forward. Sunlight reflected off of something, a sword, which was being held against the throat of the person in front. "Paul!" Eltherea cried out when she saw him. His face was swollen and bruised, and there was blood on his cloak. He stumbled forward as Raneth held him up with his other hand gripping Paul's shoulder. "Ah, do I hear Eltherea in there? I believe I have a friend of yours. Can I speak with you free from flying arrows? I would hate for anything to happen to him," Raneth called out, adding, "anything further, that is." Eltherea went to leave the hut when her mother grabbed her arm. "Wait, please, my daughter, we could still leave. I do not believe Raneth would kill him." "But he would. He admitted to me that it was he who killed Levi. But if he believes that Paul is useful, his life will be spared. I must go. Paul came back for me. It was foolish, but also brave. I cannot leave him to this fate." She went out, her mother and father following behind, and Bellarania, seeing this from her hiding place across the way, came out to join them. "Look at this! The entire family is here! It would be wise to drop your weapons," he said, pressing his blade tighter to Paul's neck. Eltherea turned to her mother, father, and sister, who reluctantly let their bows fall to the ground. "Your arrows as well." They removed the quivers from their backs and released them. "There. Now our conversation can be more civil." Raneth brought the sword down slightly while still holding fast to Paul. "I'm sorry, Ellie," Paul croaked, and Raneth pressed his sword edge again into the flesh of his neck, telling him, "You do not speak human." "Stop. Please let him go. He is not a part of this," Eltherea pleaded. "I will, but not just yet. I first want what was promised to me." "Which is?" "You, of course. You will fulfill your oath to me, and it shall not be the small ceremony of woodland elves, but the grand spectacle of the kings of old. It will be held here at Triathale, and word will be sent to surrounding villages to attend. All will witness the joining of King Raneth and his queen Eltherea and rejoice, as we bring Tuloth back into its former glory." "You really have gone mad, Raneth," Belangar said, and Eltherea turned, putting a hand on her father's chest. She looked into his eyes, and he returned her look, frowning but saying no more. She returned to face Raneth. "If I do this, you will let him go?" "No, Ellie, don't." Paul's words were stopped by Raneth, putting the flat of his blade against his mouth. "I will. I need to see him at the ceremony, to see that he is safe and free from greater injury." "He will be the guest of honor, if you so wish." "Then I will wed thee." She looked at Paul, his eyes fraught with despair. She turned her gaze to the ground. "I am glad to hear, though I am vexed it took this long for you to reaffirm our love. Well, there is much to do here to prepare. As your room has taken some damage, you may go back to Chines. In 7 days I ask that you return. We shall have the ceremony here, and I will grant a day of amnesty so that all elves," he said, looking to Belangar, then Bellarania, "can celebrate our union. This boy," Raneth shook Paul by the shoulder, "shall stay in my care until then. Now, there is no more to be said. I'll thank you to leave your bows behind." Eltherea gave Paul a final look before turning and walking down the road, her family following behind. They retrieved Primrose and were outside the wall before anyone spoke. "Will you submit to his every whim now?" her mother asked. "As long as it gives him that kind of power over you, the human will not go free. After he takes your hand in marriage, do you think he will stop there? Regardless of your feelings for Paul, please reconsider this. Raneth can have his grand spectacle, but he will get nothing else. If we are alone that night, I will make sure he doesn't see the morning sun," Eltherea stated with steely confidence. Her family looked to one another with worry as they headed back to their camp. Calarian ran into camp with the squeezer draped limply around their neck. They set it down gently on the ground next to Eritha's sleeping body, ignoring Richard and the elf tied to a nearby tree. "What has happened?" Richard said, startled by the sight of the wounded, bleeding animal. "Give me your knife," Calarian commanded. Richard did, and Calarian kneeled before the squeezer, holding the knife above its head. There was a flash of light at the exchange of minds, and Eritha let out a stifled scream as she returned to her elven form. When Calarian heard her, they brought down the blade, killing the creature instantly. Breathing heavily, they returned to Eritha, who was now sitting up. She got on her knees next to Calarian, took the knife and wiped the blood onto her hands, then brought them to her face, smearing the blood onto her cheeks. Wordlessly, she arranged the squeezer into a spiral, and she and Calarian proceeded to cover it with the surrounding dirt and leaves, after which they placed 6 stones around the mound. Richard watched all this, feeling a reverence for the death of the creature, then remembered, "That thing tried to kill me earlier." He guessed the ritual was reserved for those animals that end up unintentionally sacrificed during the dwelling magic. When they had finished with this moment of solemnity, Calarian and Eritha looked to the stranger propped up and tied against the base of the tree. "How did that elf come to be there?" Calarian asked. "Oh, he surprised me while I was guarding Eritha. He ran at me wielding a sword." "This sword," Richard said, holding up his newly acquired weapon. "You defeated an elf in combat?" "Well, I had help from a horse." The two elves looked at him with stunned expressions. Then Calarian laughed loudly as Eretha smiled, shaking her head. She embraced Richard, his cheeks visibly flushed when she let him go. "It appears I have two humans to thank for my life this day. I never knew your kind possessed such bravery." "Paul, you mean? Where is he?" Richard asked, angry at himself for only now realizing his absence. Calarian recounted what had happened within the walls of the keep, and how Paul, despite being asked to remain outside, had come in and stopped a guard from killing Eretha. They did not know what occurred after they had left him there. "You have to go back," Richard cried. "Who knows what may have befallen him? Eretha," he said, looking at her desperately, "you are well, and Calarian, you are rested. I have a sword now." Calarian was about to respond when the three other elves of their party walked into camp, along with Eltherea. Seeing her, Calarian shouted her name excitedly, but when they saw her expression and noticed Paul's absence, they asked, "What has happened? Where is Paul?" "Raneth has him. I have agreed to his conditions so that Paul's life may be spared. I return in 7 days to wed Raneth." "What? No, we could free him. You got out. Why cannot we do the same for Paul?" Eltherea looked to the human who spoke. "So you are the friend who Paul—" She interrupted herself as his features shook her memory. "Richard?" Her mouth was agape at the recognition of this man who was but a boy a few days before. Out of all the people he could have brought back from other place, he chose you? Hurt by this, Richard gathered himself for a response when Calarian spoke up in his defense. "This human saved Eretha's life. He bested that elf," they said, gesturing to the figure tied to the tree who stared back angrily at them. "I know not your history with this human, but it was fortunate that he was here." "It's all right, Calarian," Richard said. "When last she saw me, I was not worthy of such praise. Eltherea, years have passed for me, and I have grown wiser. My hope is you will see this in time, but my main concern is for Paul. Can we not go back and rescue him?" Eltherea considered Richard for a moment, then shook her head. "He will be more heavily guarded than I was, and Raneth will see to it that he is harder to reach. Right now, Paul is protected by my promise, but if Raneth catches wind of another rescue attempt, or that his advantage is in jeopardy, Paul's life may be forfeit. I would not risk it. He is safe there for now. Raneth knows there will be no wedding without Paul's presence. If he does not honor his word to release him after that, however, then we fight. So there is nothing we can do now?" "I do not like it either, but Raneth has the upper hand. We will rest here tonight and travel back to Chines in the morning. In 7 days we will return with a plan we can enact should things not go our way." The group set about getting ready for the night. Bellarania treated Raneth's soldier and let him free, cautioning him that it would be unwise to seek vengeance and should instead return to the safety of the keep. After a fire and some roasted rabbit, caught by Calarian, they laid out their bedrolls and attempted sleep, with the exception of Richard, who volunteered and was allowed to take the first watch of the evening.